It was a quiet December afternoon in Glendale, Arizona. The kind where kids play in the yard, and parents barely glance out the window. But for 7-year-old Javier Rosas, that calm would vanish the moment he was surrounded by guns and thrown in handcuffs. He was playing pretend, dressed in his usual t-shirt and sneakers, gripping a plastic toy gun with orange tips now dulled by sun and dirt. To Javier, it was a game of cops and robbers. To a passerby watching from a distance, it was a child holding what looked like a real weapon. The call to 911 was made in under a minute. Police responded in 5. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop. Officers stepped out with their weapons raised. They shouted at a little boy standing barely 4 feet tall, and that's when the handcuffs came out. Bodycam footage captured the moment clearly. Javier, visibly shaking, dropped the toy and raised his arms. His small frame trembled as 2 officers approached. Without asking his name or checking the toy, they grabbed him, turned him around, and snapped cold steel around his wrists. His face contorted in confusion and fear. The handcuffs swallowed his wrists. His arms were twisted back, and his little voice was barely audible over the shouting. "I didn't do anything," he cried. His tears ran silently. The officers kept him pinned, scanning the area, adrenaline surging. They hadn't confirmed anything, but the cuffs stayed on. He was 7 years old, and he was now cuffed like a criminal. Another officer picked up the toy, lightweight, plastic, orange-tipped. It took seconds to realize it wasn't a real gun, but the handcuffs weren't removed. Not yet. Javier remained bound, arms locked behind his back, his breathing rapid, lips quivering. In the footage, he looks left and right, as if trying to figure out what rule he had broken. But there was no explanation, no warning. His mother, alerted by neighbors, came running seconds later only to see her son, in handcuffs, flanked by 2 armed officers. Her scream shattered the moment. "He's a child!" she yelled. "He's 7. That's a toy." The officers didn't answer. They hadn't even asked his age yet. Still handcuffed, Javier looked up at his mother, silent now, as if waiting for permission to cry. He was scared but also humiliated. He wasn't playing anymore. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a deviant robber. He was just a little boy in handcuffs, with half the neighborhood watching. By the time the officers removed the cuffs, nearly 5 full minutes had passed. In those 5 minutes, Javier had gone from a child at play to a suspect in custody. The plastic gun lay on the grass, forgotten. His wrists were red. His voice was gone. But the camera never stopped rolling. The image was impossible to forget. A 7-year-old boy, wrists bound behind his back, face streaked with tears. When the bodycam footage was released, it spread like wildfire. In every frame, Javier stood in handcuffs, scared and silent, becoming the center of a storm that no one saw coming. Within hours, the video was clipped, uploaded, and dissected across YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok. Headlines screamed, "Arizona boy handcuffed over toy gun," and 7-year-old detained at gunpoint. But the footage said more than any article could. It showed a child still handcuffed, trying to understand why adults were treating him like a threat. Debate erupted nationwide. News panels showed the video on loop. Javier in handcuffs, flanked by towering officers. Some defended the police, citing community safety and how realistic toy guns can appear. Others were furious. "You don't need a PhD to know that's a child," one anchor said. "And you don't put handcuffs on a crying 7-year-old unless something is seriously broken." Across social media, the phrase "toy cop" started trending. People weren't just talking about the incident, they were replaying it, freezing the frame on Javier's arms behind his back, zooming in on the oversized cuffs biting into his skin. Artists drew him. Commentators analyzed every second he spent restrained. For millions, the handcuffs were no longer just a tool, they were a symbol. Even law enforcement felt the heat. The Glendale Police Department issued a statement defending their response, but the image of Javier in handcuffs kept circulating. Activists marched with posters showing his face. Local parents demanded change. Why didn't the officers ask questions first? Why didn't they de-escalate? Why did it take so long to remove the cuffs? Javier's family stayed out of the spotlight at first, but eventually, his mother spoke up. Her voice shook as she recalled seeing her son in cuffs, unable to move or speak. He didn't understand, she said. He thought he was going to jail. She held up the toy gun, now scratched and dirty, barely resembling a real firearm. This is what they saw as a threat. The boy himself didn't say much. In interviews, he fidgeted, avoided cameras, and only whispered answers. But every time the video was played, Javier in handcuffs, looking up at armed strangers, the internet erupted all over again. He didn't have to speak. The footage said enough. The emotional weight of the image stretched far beyond Arizona. Educators used the story in classrooms to talk about bias and over-policing. Civil rights groups cited it in campaigns. Parents had hard conversations with their kids, many holding back tears as they explained why a child with brown skin holding a toy gun might still end up in handcuffs. And still, through it all, Javier remained the boy in the photo. The boy in the cuffs. The freeze frame of fear and confusion. A moment that should have been make-believe, captured in cold metal and bodycam footage. Not everyone agreed on the officer's intentions, but no one could deny what they saw. A child crying, a toy on the ground, and wrists too small for steel. Time moved on, but Javier Rosas's time in handcuffs never left him. He was only 7 when it happened, but even as he turned 8 and 9, the questions lingered. Why had they grabbed him like that? Why hadn't they listened? His world had changed the moment the metal closed around his wrists. He had gone from pretending to be a cop to being treated like a suspect, hands locked behind his back, heart pounding through his ribs. His parents said he stopped playing with toy guns. The same boy who once ran through the yard in costume, pretending to save the day, now hesitated to step outside with anything in his hands. He checks what he's holding before going outside, his mother said. Even if it's a stick. He asks, "Will they cuff me again?" The fear hadn't faded. The cuffs might have come off that day, but they had left a mark no one could see. At school, some classmates recognized him from the video. "You're the kid who got arrested," they'd whisper. They remembered him in handcuffs, even if he didn't want to remember it himself. He tried to explain it wasn't real, he wasn't arrested, he didn't do anything wrong, but those clips online didn't come with disclaimers. All they showed was a crying boy in cuffs, too small for the place, situation he was forced into. Community leaders reached out. One offered to let Javier tour a police station to replace fear with familiarity. But his mother declined. He doesn't want to see another cop, she said. He sees the uniform, and all he remembers are the cuffs. That moment, that weight. Javier's fear wasn't of punishment. It was of being misunderstood again and not being able to speak fast enough before his hands were behind his back once more. Activists rallied for laws requiring stricter guidelines for handling minors, especially with replica weapons. The next Javier might not be so lucky, one said. The next child in handcuffs might not go home. Protests used Javier's image not for pity, but as a mirror that forced people to look at how authority responds when fear overtakes judgment. But to Javier, the story wasn't about politics. It was about a feeling he couldn't forget. He didn't know the terms use of force or de-escalation. He only knew the sound the cuffs made when they snapped shut, the sound of his own voice asking, "What did I do?" The sound of adults yelling, the ground pressing into his knees, the cold metal against his skin. Even now, years later, the footage continues to circulate. Every time it reappears online, someone somewhere sees it for the first time. A child in handcuffs, confused and harmless, frozen in fear. Some viewers cry, some get angry, some scroll past. But all of them remember the image, because that image speaks louder than any explanation. And Javier? He hasn't forgotten. Not the cuffs. Not the way the officers looked at him. Not the silence after it was all over. He might grow up, move on, even find peace, but there's a part of him that still stands there, in that yard, hands behind his back, waiting for someone to tell him it was all a mistake. It was supposed to be just a game, but for Javier Rosas, the handcuffs made sure it was real.